Hi, I'm Amy from Amorini Designs. Today I'm here to walk you through how to create this candy cane striped Christmas mug rug. It's one of 3 pattern styles that you can find in my new Christmas mug rug pattern. There is this double stripe version as well as this plaid panel version. All 3 instructions are included in the same pattern, as well as 5 different applique shapes, the 3 you see here, as well as a gift and ornament version. I will link to that pattern in the description below, but today we are going to be walking through the candy cane stripe version. Now, this is one that can be done 2 different ways. We can do it with traditional piecing, or you can use foundation paper piecing, whichever method is most familiar and comfortable to you. And I'm going to walk you through both different steps today. The first thing that you're going to do is you are going to cut out your strips of fabric to create your stripes. You need to have a wide stripe as well as a narrow stripe. In this case, I'm using 2 different candy cane prints. You can do whichever ones you would like. The one thing that I would recommend before you cut these out is to starch your fabrics before you cut them. It helps the strips keep their shape, which is really useful when you are piecing these together. Whether you decide to do it traditional or foundation paper pieced, having that starch on there is very helpful. Once you have them all cut out, then you need to decide which way you're going to go. Now, one quick note, if you are using the foundation paper piecing method for this, you will not need all of the length for all of these strips. So you may be able to cut one less of your skinny strip here. And if you are short a little bit of fabric, the foundation paper piece might be the way that lets you kind of fudge it a little bit and get through it. That's just kind of a little aside there. But if you are doing the traditional piece, I recommend doing the full length on all of them, just to make sure you have plenty of room to get your template all spaced and set on your pattern. Okay, so we are going to begin with our foundation paper piecing method, and then I'll walk you through how to create this using traditional piecing. If you are doing the foundation paper piecing, you are going to begin with your paper template. Now, I like to trim off a little bit of the edges on here, but you still want to leave a paper margin around the outside of your pattern piece. That way, when you get to the end and you go to trim it and square it up, you have a nice solid line to work from there. In this case, I'm not going to worry too much about it because it's not too much extra paper to deal with. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a crease right here on this dotted line. Now, the thing about foundation paper piecing that is a little bit tricky is that you are creating a mirror image because you're using the guides on the front to sew, and you are going to be building it right side up on the back. So sometimes there's a little bit of a mind bend game here. And because of that, I recommend using fabric that isn't directional or anything, so that you don't have to try to kind of figure out if it's flipped and turn, whatever, that it's going to be right side up. So using non-directional will just simplify your life in lots of ways. Okay, so first we're going to take our paper here, and I am just going to make a crease right there on that dotted line. And the reason that I'm doing this is so that I have a guide where I can place my fabric on the other side, because we are going to be laying our fabrics here on the wrong side of our paper so that we can sew them. So I have my crease here, and I'm going to start taking a narrow strip of fabric. So in this case, I'm using my red fabric, and I'm going to place it right side up on my paper here and lining up the edge with that creased line. Once I've done that, then I'm going to take a wide stripe piece, and I'm going to place it right sides together and line up that edge. Now, there's a couple of things to note with what we're working on here. We are working with angled stripes. And so this one is, I can place it kind of close to the edge because it's not moving, it's already right side up. But this second piece, I am going to be flipping it over like this once it's sewn down. Now you can see if I line up this edge here with what is the top of my pattern piece, When I go to flip this piece down, all of a sudden I don't have enough coverage of fabric here to finish up this row of my fabric that I need. So when you are placing these, it will be just much easier on yourself if you go ahead and try to center, or at least be super generous with how you're placing your fabric on this side of, on both sides, because you also are going to be folding it down this way over here, and you want to make sure that because of the angles, you're not losing any fabric. So make sure that you're giving yourself a really wide margin on both sides of this. So I have my two fabrics lined up along that line, and I'm going to just double check and make sure it's right up on that crease. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a couple of pins, but I'm going to pin outside of my pattern piece where I'm going to be sewing, because I want to make sure that I can sew on my line and not get obstructed. And my pins are actually on the wrong side of the paper, which is going to make it a little bit tricky to pull them out while I'm in the middle of sewing. So I like to use pins that are a little bit flat. It just helps everything feed through the machine better. And then again, I'm going to put my pins on the outside of my sewing. I'm going to take this to my machine. I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to sew right along this solid diagonal line right here, and that's going to create my first piece. So again, this is where it gets a little tricky because you're flipping back and forth and you're working. This is a really simple pattern to begin working with foundation paper piecing, because you're only alternating stripes. So it's always going to be very clear which one your next one is. And that makes it really easy and straightforward. So I'm going to take this to my machine. Also, when you're stitching this, make sure that you secure your stitches at the beginning and ending. Once this is finished and sewn all the way, we're going to pull this paper out, and that's going to put a little bit of stress on the stitches that we create. So we want to make sure that we're not going to loosen the edges on either end of here. So make sure you do a fixed stitch or do a couple of back stitches here to make sure you're securing your stitching inside this cut, this solid line where you're going to be cutting at the end. Make sure that you back stitch here, sew across this line, back stitch or fixed stitch here. A fixed stitch on my machine is just, it ties basically a little knot right there. However you secure your stitches, make sure you do it at the beginning and ending of each row as you sew. So I'm going to take this to my machine, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you how we are doing our foundation paper piecing. Okay, so I have gone ahead and sewn across that solid line right there. And then I'm going to take this to my iron, and even with the paper right there, I'm going to flip over that stripe, and I am going to press it flat. Now I am going to take my next stripe, which I have gone narrow, wide, so I'm going to take a narrow stripe, and I'm going to line it up just with the edge of this wide stripe of fabric. Now, again, make sure that you are being generous in how you are positioning your fabric to make sure that you have plenty of carryover on both sides to account for the angles and making sure that we have enough coverage. And then again, I'm going to go ahead and pin this fabric into place. And take it to my machine and sew right along this next solid line. Now, the reason that we have this dotted line here is that it counts for the seam allowance as we are building our rows here. So when you kind of look across over here, you can see that this wide stripe is extending about 1/4 inch past this sewn line, so that we're making sure we have all of our seam allowances in there. So as long as you have cut the width of your strips accurately, you should be able to just use that edge there as your line to line up the next piece of fabric. Then you're going to flip it over again. So along the paper side on the solid lines, back stitching at the beginning and ending to secure your stitches. Then you'll take it over, remove the pins, flip your fabric, and continue until you have covered the entire piece of your pattern piece here. So I'm going to take this to my machine, finish all that up, then I'll come back and show you how we finish up our mug rug. Once you've sewn all the way across the entire foundation paper piece template, then you are going to take it to your cutting mat. I just like to use a rotary blade and my acrylic ruler. And then I'm just going to line it up with the solid lines, and I'm going to trim away all of the extra bits of fabric and thread right along those template lines. And the seam allowance is already compensated for inside of the pattern piece, so you don't need to add an extra 1/4 inch or anything to it. It's already part of the template here. So I'm going to go ahead, trim these last 2 sides. And then what you're left with is a nice square, perfectly even and measured across striped piece of fabric. Now, the next thing that you're going to want to do is pull out your foundation paper. So what I typically will do is I kind of give it a little bit of a rundown, fold it back with my finger, and then I try to pull it straight away from the stitches instead of up, to try to put as little tension on my stitches as I can. So again, I will fold the paper piece over, kind of try to score it with my fingernail. I find that helps a little bit. And then again, instead of pulling up and against the stitches, I try to pull kind of down and away from it. So one thing that might be helpful before you even sew anything on here is sometimes when I'm doing foundation paper piecing, especially if they're little pieces that I'm trying to rip out, shorten your stitch length just a hair. And what that does is it creates a little bit more perforation to your paper, which makes it just a little bit easier to pull it out at the end. So then I'm going to just loosen this second side of paper here, and then keep working my way down. And then once I have all of the paper out, then you can sew on your bottom piece of fabric that will be the background for your applique, and add your applique, and then finish up with your mug rug. And now that you have seen how to do the foundation paper piecing, we're going to go ahead and go over, and I'm going to show you how to do this with just traditional piecing and your fabric strips. When we are doing the traditional piecing for our candy stripe mug rug, the first thing that you are going to do is you are going to take and make pairs of a wide and a narrow striped fabric. So I'm going to take and just place them right sides up, line up one long edge, and then I am going to sew using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each pair here. Now, I find it's easier to just do them all exactly the same. So I keep my wide stripe up, put my narrow strip on top, and sew along that edge. That way, when I go to undo them all, they're all going the same direction. Again, we're using non-directional fabric, so if you put it on the other side, you can just flip it over. It should be fine. But it just helps to be consistent and put your pairs together that way. Once you have all of your pairs together, another tip that I have for working with narrow pieces of fabric like this is to press your seam allowances open. So I have pressed all of these seam allowances open on all of my pairs, and then you will have one leftover narrow strip of fabric. The first thing that you're going to do is place one pair of fabrics right side up in front of you on your work surface. Then you're going to measure up 1 1/4 inches from the bottom, and you're going to place your second strip. So I have my ruler here, and I am just going to measure 1 1/4 inches, and then I am going to place my next strip right sides together on top of that one. And then I'm going to sew along this long side, again, using my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I will usually put a couple of pins in there. and sew that together. I'm going to keep repeating that process until all of my pairs are sewn together. So once I get that all put together, then you'll notice that on this side, I have started with a wide strip here. So I'm going to take my last remaining narrow strip. I'm going to measure down 1 1/4 inches, and I'm going to add it to this side to finish up my striped panel. So I'm going to head to my machine and sew all of these together. And when I come back, I'm going to show you what this is going to look like. Okay, once we have all of our strips sewn together, we are going to use the pattern template that's included to cut out and angle our rows. So your strip is going to look like this, and we're going to angle it. Now you could use a 45-degree marking on a ruler and go ahead and create, you know, your grid here if you want, but using this is a really quick and easy way. So because this is designed to be your foundation paper piece, it's actually the mirror image of the stripes that we are going for. So you see they're going opposite direction. Even if you turn it, still wrong direction, right? So we are going to flip it over to use it. And I mean, if you want your stripes going this direction, then just do it like that. I want to say but these rows are going to be going the wrong way. So you will have to flip it over. All right, so then what you're going to do is you can see the shadow on the other side, the wrong side of your pattern here, and you are just going to line it up and use your darker stripe, whatever one it is, to line up with the edges. So if your wide stripe is darker, you're going to use that to kind of help you position this to make sure that that angle is going consistent. And then you are just going to, you could use your rotary cutter right along the edges of these patterns, or pin it and use some scissors to trim the edges right around. And then you will have the front of your mug rug piece done. The last step is just to sew on this base applique background here, and then go ahead and add your applique. Now I do have a video tutorial walking you through how to do raw edge applique if that's something you're new to and haven't done before. I also have a whole series, a playlist of how I do the binding on small projects like this. And that again is also here on my YouTube channel. So once you have it all done, you can quilt and bind it the way you like, and your candy cane striped Christmas mug rug is finished. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Like I said, I will have all 3 different mug rug style video tutorials walking you through, and you can have a whole set of happy Christmas mug rugs. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you have, feel free to subscribe, and until I see you next time, happy sewing, my friends.